before you blame people, before you blame your circumstances, before you blame your bad luck, ask yourself one question. What have you been tolerating? Because the truth is, your life changes the moment you stop accepting things that should never have been accepted. Think about it. The disrespect, the broken promises, the excuses, the toxic relationships, the bad habits, the average standards. None of these things entered your life overnight. They stayed because they were tolerated. That's the part nobody wants to hear. People treat you based on what you allow. Life gives you more of what you accept. And every time you tolerate something beneath your standards, you send a message to the world, a message to other people, a message to yourself. You say, this is okay, even when it isn't. You say, I deserve this, even when you don't. And over time, that tolerance becomes your reality. That's why some people stay stuck for years. Not because they lack potential, not because they lack talent, because they keep accepting things that are destroying them. They tolerate disrespect. They tolerate laziness. They tolerate mediocrity. They tolerate excuses. And then they wonder why their life never changes. But life doesn't change when you wish for better. Life changes when you refuse to accept less. The day you raise your standards, everything changes. Your relationships change. Your habits change. Your confidence changes. Your future changes. Because you don't get what you want. You don't get what you hope for. You don't get what you dream about. You get what you tolerate. And if you want a different life, you must stop accepting the things that are keeping you exactly where you are. Before you blame people, before you blame your circumstances, before you blame your bad luck, ask yourself one question. What have you been tolerating? Because the truth is, your life changes the moment you stop accepting things that should never have been accepted. Think about it. The disrespect, the broken promises, the excuses, the toxic relationships, the bad habits, the average standards. None of these things entered your life overnight. They stayed because they were tolerated. That's the part nobody wants to hear. People treat you based on what you allow. Life gives you more of what you accept. And every time you tolerate something beneath your standards, you send a message to the world, a message to other people, a message to yourself. You say, this is okay, even when it isn't. You say, I deserve this, even when you don't. And over time, that tolerance becomes your reality. That's why some people stay stuck for years. Not because they lack potential, not because they lack talent, because they keep accepting things that are destroying them. They tolerate disrespect. They tolerate laziness. They tolerate mediocrity. They tolerate excuses. And then they wonder why their life never changes. But life doesn't change when you wish for better. Life changes when you refuse to accept less. The day you raise your standards, everything changes. Your relationships change. Your habits change. Your confidence changes. Your future changes. Because you don't get what you want. You don't get what you hope for. You don't get what you dream about. You get what you tolerate. And if you want a different life, you must stop accepting the things that are keeping you exactly where you are. Here's a truth that changes everything. People don't respect the standards you talk about. They respect the standards you enforce. Anyone can say, I deserve better. Anyone can say, I won't tolerate that. Anyone can post quotes about self-respect. But words mean nothing without action. Because every boundary you fail to enforce becomes a suggestion. And suggestions don't change behavior. Actions do. Think about your life. How many times have you told someone to stop? Stop lying. Stop disrespecting you. Stop taking advantage of your kindness. Stop breaking promises. And yet they kept doing it. Why? Because they learned something. Your words had no consequences. That's why boundaries matter. Not because you're trying to control people. Because you're teaching people how to treat you. Every healthy relationship has boundaries. Every successful person has boundaries. Every confident person has boundaries. Without boundaries, people take more than they should, demand more than they deserve, and eventually leave you exhausted, trying to please everyone, trying to keep everyone happy, trying to avoid disappointing people. But here's the problem. The more you try to please everyone, the more you start betraying yourself. You say yes when you want to say no. You stay silent when you need to speak. You accept things that violate your values. And little by little, you lose respect for yourself. That's the hidden danger. Because self-respect is built through action. Every time you honor your standards, self-respect grows. every time you abandon your standards. Self-respect weakens. That's why confident people seem different. It's not because they never feel fear. It's because they refuse to negotiate with their values. They understand something powerful. Every boundary costs something. You might lose people. You might lose approval. You might lose temporary comfort. But you'll gain something far more valuable. Respect, peace, freedom, and most importantly, you'll gain respect for yourself. Because at the end of the day, people learn what they can get away with. But they also learn what they can't. And the moment you start enforcing higher standards, the wrong people become uncomfortable. The right people become respectful. And your entire life begins to change. Because people don't respect the standards you announce. They respect the standards you enforce. Most people are waiting for their life to change. Waiting for more money. Waiting for more confidence. Waiting for a better opportunity. Waiting for the right person. Waiting for motivation. But change doesn't start when something new enters your life. Change starts when something unacceptable leaves your life. Read that again, because that's where most people get stuck. They keep trying to add positive things, while refusing to remove negative things. They want confidence, but tolerate self-doubt. They want success, but tolerate procrastination. They want respect, but tolerate disrespect. They want peace, but tolerate chaos. And then they wonder why nothing improves. But how can something better enter your life when you're still making room for things that are making it worse? At some point, you have to decide. Enough is enough. Enough excuses. Enough delays. Enough broken promises. Enough settling. Enough accepting behavior that keeps pulling you backward. Because every level of life requires a different standard. The standard that created your current reality cannot create your next reality. Something has to change, and that something is usually what you've been tolerating. Think about the most successful people you know, the most disciplined people, the most respected people, the most confident people. They all have something in common. They refuse to tolerate certain things. They refuse to tolerate excuses from themselves. They refuse to tolerate negative environments. They refuse to tolerate habits that weaken them. They refuse to tolerate relationships that constantly drain them. Not because they're lucky, because they understand the power of standards. They understand that every yes is also a no. When you say yes to excuses, you're saying no to growth. When you say yes to comfort, you're saying no to potential. When you say yes to average, you're saying no to excellence. Every choice has a cost. Every tolerance has a consequence. That's why your future is being shaped right now. Not by your goals, not by your dreams, not by your intentions, by your standards. Because standards create actions. Actions create habits. Habits create results. And results create your life. The reason some people stay stuck for 10 years is not because they lacked opportunity. It's because they tolerated the same behaviors for 10 years. The same excuses, the same fears, the same distractions, the same lack of discipline. Year after year, nothing changes because nothing was challenged. Nothing was rejected. Nothing was removed. But the moment a person raises their standards, everything starts moving. The moment they say, I will not tolerate this anymore, a new life begins. A stronger life, a healthier life, a more disciplined life, a more peaceful life. Because growth begins where tolerance ends. And the quality of your future will always be determined by what you're willing to stop accepting today. Most people don't realize this. The future isn't created in dramatic moments. It's created in daily decisions. Tiny decisions. Invisible decisions. The decisions nobody sees. The decisions nobody applauds. The decisions that seem insignificant at the time. That's where your future is being built. Right now, this very moment. Every standard you lower shapes your future. Every excuse you accept shapes your future. Every bad habit you tolerate shapes your future. The scary part is that consequences rarely arrive immediately. That's why people keep making the same mistakes. If every bad decision created instant pain, nobody would repeat it. But life doesn't work that way. The consequences are delayed. And that's what makes tolerance so dangerous. You tolerate laziness today. Nothing happens. You tolerate it tomorrow. Still nothing happens. A month passes. A year passes. Then one day you wake up and realize you've become someone you never wanted to be. Not because of one decision, because of thousands of tolerated decisions. The same thing happens in relationships. Nobody wakes up one morning trapped in a toxic relationship. It happens slowly. One disrespectful comment, one broken promise, one crossed boundary, one excuse, one compromise. And because each event seems small, it gets tolerated until years later, the relationship has become something unrecognizable. And the same thing happens financially, professionally, mentally, spiritually. Every area of life follows the same principle. What you tolerate grows. What you allow continues. What you excuse expands. That's why standards matter so much. Because standards don't just protect your present. They protect your future. Every successful person understands this. They don't wait until things become unbearable. They address problems early. They correct mistakes quickly. They eliminate behaviors that pull them backward because they know something most people ignore. Small problems become big problems when they're tolerated. A small lie becomes a habit. A small excuse becomes a lifestyle. A small weakness becomes a limitation. A small compromise becomes a pattern. And patterns create destiny. That's why you have to become ruthless with the things that are destroying your future. Not ruthless toward people. Ruthless toward excuses. Ruthless toward procrastination. Ruthless toward low standards. Ruthless toward anything that keeps you from becoming who you're capable of becoming. Because your future self is watching. The person you'll become in 5 years is watching. The person you'll become in 10 years is watching. And every choice you make today is either helping them or hurting them, building them or weakening them, preparing them or limiting them. The future you're praying for requires standards you're not currently tolerating. Think about that. The life you want demands a version of you that refuses to accept average, refuses to accept excuses, refuses to accept less than their potential. Because the truth is simple. You don't become successful overnight. You don't become confident overnight. You don't become disciplined overnight. You become those things one decision at a time, one standard at a time, one refusal at a time. The moment you stop tolerating what weakens you, you begin creating a future that strengthens you. And that's how transformation starts. Not with motivation, not with inspiration, but with a decision that says, this ends here. No more excuses, no more settling, no more accepting what is costing me my future. Because what you tolerate today will eventually become the life you live tomorrow. Most people think this message is about other people. It's not. It's about you. Because the biggest problem in your life is usually not what others are doing. It's what you're allowing yourself to do. The excuses, the procrastination, the lack of discipline, the broken promises you make to yourself. That's where the real battle begins. Think about it. How many times have you said, I'll start Monday. I'll start next month. I'll get serious next year. I'll do it when I feel ready. And then you didn't. Once doesn't seem like a big deal. Twice doesn't seem like a big deal. But after years of repeating the same pattern, something dangerous happens. You stop trusting yourself. And that's the hidden cost of self-tolerance. Every promise you break to yourself weakens your self-respect. Every excuse you accept weakens your confidence. Every commitment you abandon weakens your identity. Because confidence isn't built by positive thinking. It's built by self-trust. And self-trust is built when your actions match your words. When you say you'll do something, and you do it, again, and again, and again. That's how confidence grows. But most people are doing the opposite. They're training themselves not to trust themselves. They set goals, then ignore them. They make promises, then break them. They create standards, then abandon them. And eventually, their own mind stops believing them. That's why some people struggle with confidence. Not because they're incapable, because they've spent years proving to themselves that their own word means nothing. Think about how powerful that is. If someone else lied to you every day, would you trust them? Of course not. Then why would your mind trust you when you keep lying to yourself? I'll start tomorrow. I'll wake up early. I'll stay disciplined. I'll stop making excuses. The words sound good, but the actions never follow. And over time, self-respect begins to disappear. That's why the strongest people aren't necessarily the smartest, or the most talented, or the most gifted. They're simply people who stop tolerating weakness from themselves. Not in a cruel way, in an honest way. They stop negotiating. stopped rationalizing, stopped making excuses. They became accountable. Because accountability is where transformation begins. The moment you stop blaming circumstances, you gain power. The moment you stop blaming other people, you gain power. The moment you stop tolerating your own excuses, you gain power. Real power. The power to change your life. Because the truth is, nobody is stopping you. Not really. The greatest limitations in your life are often the ones you've learned to accept, the habits you've normalized, the excuses you've justified, the standards you've lowered. And the moment you stop tolerating those things, your life changes. Not overnight, but permanently. Because when you stop lying to yourself, stop betraying yourself, stop settling with yourself, you become someone different, someone stronger, someone more disciplined, someone more dangerous to their own excuses. And that's when everything starts to change. Because the hardest person you'll ever have to lead is yourself. And the moment you stop tolerating your own weakness, you finally begin to discover your strength. Right now, there is something in your life you already know needs to change. You know it. You've known it for a while. Maybe it's a habit. Maybe it's a relationship. Maybe it's your mindset. Maybe it's the excuses you've been carrying for years. Whatever it is, you already know. The problem isn't awareness. The problem is action. Because action is uncomfortable. Action forces decisions. Action forces responsibility. Action forces change. And change is painful, at least in the beginning. That's why most people stay where they are. Not because they're happy, because they're familiar. Familiar with the stress. Familiar with the excuses. Familiar with the disappointment. Familiar with the version of themselves they've become. And even when that version is making them miserable, they stay. Because the known feels safer than the unknown. But here's the truth. Your comfort zone is not protecting you. It's imprisoning you. Every day you stay in a situation you know is wrong, you pay a price. A price in confidence. A price in self-respect. A price in potential. Because deep down, you know you're capable of more. You know you're meant for more. You know this isn't the best version of you. And that knowledge becomes painful. Because potential ignored eventually becomes regret. Think about the people who reach the end of their lives filled with regret. Most of them aren't regretting the risks they took. They're regretting the risks they never took. The conversations they never had. The dreams they never pursued. The standards they never enforced. The life they never allowed themselves to live. All because they kept tolerating what should have been changed. That's why this moment matters. Because one decision can change everything. One boundary, one commitment, one refusal, one moment where you finally say, no more. No more excuses. No more settling. No more accepting less than what I know I'm capable of becoming. And the moment you make that decision, something shifts. You begin taking your power back. You begin rebuilding trust in yourself. You begin becoming the person you've been avoiding becoming. Not overnight, but day by day, choice by choice, standard by standard. Because the life you want isn't far away. It's hidden behind the decisions you've been afraid to make. And one day, you'll realize something. The thing you were most afraid of changing was the very thing holding your life back. That's why growth requires courage. Because every new chapter begins with a decision to stop tolerating the old one. There comes a moment in every person's life when they run out of excuses. Not because the excuses disappear, because they're no longer willing to believe them. For years, you told yourself stories. Stories that made staying comfortable easier. I'll start when I have more time. I'll start when I have more money. I'll start when I feel motivated. I'll start when life calms down. But life never calmed down. The perfect moment never arrived. And motivation never stayed. Because those things were never the problem. The problem was tolerance. You tolerated delay. You tolerated procrastination. You tolerated average. You tolerated becoming less than who you could be. And the hardest truth of all, you knew it. Deep down, you always knew it. You knew when you hit snooze. You knew when you quit early. You knew when you chose comfort over growth. You knew when you betrayed your own standards. Because nobody knows your potential better than you. Nobody knows what you're capable of becoming better than you. That's why regret hurts so much. Regret isn't pain from failure. Regret is pain from knowing you could have done more. Could have become more. Could have given more. And that's a heavy burden to carry. The good news is this. You don't have to carry it anymore. Because the future is still being written. Your story is still being written. Your life is still being written. And every day gives you another chance. Another chance to raise your standards. Another chance to keep your word. Another chance to stop settling. Most people wait for a breakthrough. But breakthroughs rarely happen first. Standards happen first. Discipline happens first. Responsibility happens first. Then the breakthrough arrives. That's why your life won't change when your circumstances change. Your life will change when your standards change. When you stop accepting weakness from yourself. When you stop making excuses for yourself. When you stop negotiating with your future. Because every excuse feels small in the moment. But over a lifetime, excuses become regrets. And every act of discipline feels difficult in the moment. But over a lifetime, discipline becomes freedom. So the question isn't whether you're capable. You are. The question isn't whether you have potential. You do. The question is, how much longer are you willing to tolerate the habits that are stealing your future? How much longer are you willing to tolerate the excuses that are keeping you average? How much longer are you willing to tolerate a version of yourself that you know you're supposed to outgrow? Because one day, you'll get tired. Tired of waiting. Tired of settling. Tired of watching life pass by. And when that day comes, everything changes. Because real transformation begins the moment you become more tired of your excuses than you are afraid of change. And that's the day your new life begins. At the end of the day, life gives everyone a choice. Not once. Every single day. The choice to accept, or the choice to change. The choice to settle, or the choice to grow. The choice to keep making excuses, or the choice to take responsibility. And every day you make that choice, whether you realize it or not. Because every standard you accept becomes part of your identity. Every habit you tolerate becomes part of your future. Every excuse you allow becomes part of your story. That's why this message matters. Because your life is not determined by what you dream about. It's determined by what you allow. You don't become successful by wanting success. You become successful by refusing to tolerate the habits that create failure. You don't become confident by wishing for confidence. You become confident by refusing to tolerate broken promises to yourself. You don't become extraordinary by hoping for a better life. You become extraordinary by refusing to accept an average one. That's the difference. The people you admire are not different because they had fewer problems. They're different because they had higher standards. They got tired of their own excuses, tired of their own limitations, tired of watching their potential go unused. And they made a decision that changed everything. No more settling, no more waiting, no more accepting less than they were capable of becoming. Now it's your turn, because the future version of you is watching every decision, watching every excuse, watching every standard. And one day, you'll become the person you're creating right now. The question is simple. Will that person thank you? Or will they wish you had demanded more from yourself? Because in the end, you don't get what you want. You don't get what you wish for. You don't get what you hope for. You get what you tolerate. So raise your standards. Protect your future. And become someone your future self will be proud to remember. Your life changes the moment your standards change. Your future changes the moment your excuses end. Because in the end, you get what you tolerate.